men developing less testosterone, how much does the diet of the man and women play a role in that? Like, how does lifestyle, right? Like, if you're a healthy adult and you go to the gym and you eat perfect, obviously your sperm quality is theoretically supposed to be higher. And
Right.
then let's say the female is eating healthy, doesn't smoke, doesn't do
Mhm.
drugs, doesn't drink alcohol, very healthy, meditates, stress for like low stress.
Right.
How much does that play a role into the development of the child? And then, into adolescent and then into adulthood, one, and then the next question would be, what's like the origin story of decreased testosterone? Is it
Right.
food? Is it air quality? What is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're bringing up this notion of what's the impact of lifestyle factors on testosterone and perhaps the decrease that we've seen. So it's a great question. This is one of the first things that scientists tried to investigate when they saw this generational decline in testosterone. By the way, it's so drastic that the difference between basically your testosterone, let's say at the age of 30, versus your father's testosterone at the age of 30, he had probably twice as much testosterone than you did at the same age, right? And so Forbes wrote this great article about it. It's called "You're Not the Man Your Father Was," which is kind of like a stab in the heart if you kind of feel
Yeah.
about it. Because I don't know, physiologically and maybe even psychologically, and how you perceive yourself, you're not quite the same. So the question is why? And they looked at lifestyle factors. One of the biggest lifestyle factors is obesity, right? There's been a huge change even in that one generational span in terms of obesity. 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. 88% of Americans have a metabolic dysregulation, meaning high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and dyslipidemia. These factors are contributing to the decline in testosterone because the more body fat that you carry, the more aromatase enzyme that you carry.
Mm.
And aromatase is
Mm.
basically the enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. So it
Are
literally
these
converts to less masculine, more feminine.
are these people that, let's say, they have type 2 diabetes or they're overweight? Are
Mhm.
you saying that because you cause yourself to be type 2 diabetic or you cause yourself to be obese, now you have a direct correlation with low testosterone? Or this is the people that have type 2 diabetes that are breeding, now their offspring is going to be predisposed to lower testosterone because you are, let's just say, obese or overweight, and now you're mating with someone, you carrying those genes off to your offspring, or both?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about diabetes. So type 1 diabetes, which is used to be called juvenile diabetes, much more genetic. You basically have a
Mhm.
pancreatic dysfunction. You're not able to produce insulin. These folks inject insulin even from a very early age. Most of the diabetes, however, that we have in our society is what's called type 2 diabetes. And even if there's a genetic predisposition, for instance, certain ethnic groups have a higher predisposition to type 2 diabetes, we even find that those ethnic groups, when they come to the United States, have much higher rates of diabetes. So that suggests that even with the predisposition, it's mostly as a lifestyle disease, right? And we know this also because of all the work that I did at Omada in that lifestyle intervention. When you get people to lose 5 to 10% of their body weight, it dramatically reduces or if you will, reverses the risk of diabetes. So it's
Mm.
largely a lifestyle thing because our genetics haven't really changed in 50 years, right? It's mostly lifestyle, and the rate of obesity and diabetes, or what's now called diabesity because it kind of goes hand in hand, has dramatically changed over the course of literally one generation, which is primarily driven by ultra processed food, as you brought up. So diet plays obviously a huge role, and obviously the less whole food that you're eating, the more ultra processed food. 66% of American calories now come from ultra processed food, which is stuff that you really can't make at home. It's like a Cheeto, for instance, that can only be made in the factory. Food scientists have optimized it so that it's dispersing calories and amazing taste,
Mm.
but doesn't
Yeah.
have much nutritional benefits. So that's a huge factor. There are some other lifestyle factors that are driving the decrease in testosterone. For instance, smoking, depression can drive these things. But here's the interesting thing: when they try to statistically control for these factors, even though they know, for instance, obesity is one of the major drivers, even when you control for it, meaning that you correct essentially the analysis to say, let's assume everyone was the same way, you're still seeing a decline in testosterone. So the researchers are like,
Mm.
okay, what else is driving it if it's not lifestyle? And one of the hypotheses is endocrine disrupting chemicals. There's a lot of chemicals that come in our food. So it's not just that nutrition's obviously the poor nutrition's causing us to be overweight and obese, causing diabetes, and thus disrupting our endocrine function, but we're literally have sort of these pollutants in our food. in the form of microplastics that are, everything, especially that's packaged, comes in plastic these days. You almost can't get
Yes.
away with it. Very rare that you have like bottled milk and glass anymore, right? And particularly when it comes to foods that are like drinks or foods that are acidic, it literally eats away at the plastics and it becomes part of your food and you're literally consuming it. So people might have recalled maybe like a decade ago, there was a whole controversy around one of these chemicals called BPA, which was actually found to be an endocrine disruptor. It basically functions as what's called xenoestrogen or a synthetic estrogen. It mimics the estrogen molecule in your body. And for men, when they're consuming all these sort of synthetic estrogens, it disrupts your endocrine system. It can be sort of feminizing. And so they banned BPA, for instance, in Nalgene bottles. It used to be in the lining of cans, like the little quad that's so popular in startups, and any sort of canned foods. The problem is there's lots of other chemicals like BPS, for instance, very similar sort of chemical that has not been banned. So it's not like they've gotten rid of all these plastics in the food, in the packaging that we consume. They've just kind of replaced it with stuff that's quite frankly not legal yet. But ironically, if you look at places like Europe, is illegal. So essentially, we have a very unregulated, I call it big food industry, in which really their priority is cutting costs and making it taste delicious so that you're addicted to it. They're not designing it in a way that's optimal for your health, and they quite frankly don't care that they're polluting your body. And so we have this onslaught essentially of these endocrine disrupting chemicals. It's in our water, it's in our food, it's in our clothing because of how, so much synthetic fabrics that we use, or the dyes that are used in our clothing. Anything that's flame or fire retardant, including our carpets and our mattresses, are all sprayed with chemicals. Now, for good reason, you don't want your mattress to light on fire in the middle of the night, but you're also sleeping on it, rubbing it all over your skin. The skin is the largest organ of the body. It actually does absorb chemicals. And Teflon and the non-stick coating that's ubiquitous in our cookware is being cooked up. It goes into your food and then you're ingesting it. So it's not just the terrible Cheetos that we're consuming, but it's all the pollutants that come with that in our food and water that is having a drastic impact on it. And one of the reasons we suspect that to be true is it's not just affecting humans, but it's affecting literally our dogs and our pets as well. Dog sperm count has also decreased over time, and they're obviously eating a lot of ultra processed foods in the form of dog foods that we're providing. So that suggests to us that it's not just a human phenomenon, it's literally an environmental phenomenon that because of all this like fake food, quite frankly, that we're consuming, it's really messing up our hormone production.
Do people still drink milk?
Well, maybe not if you're in LA because it's fallen out of favor. But you know,
I feel like they drink almond milk. It's a fake milk. That's not almond milk. That's a bunch of
there's
chemicals
a
mixed
lot of these
together.
alternative milks that I think, unfortunately, there's been a lot of propaganda saying that milk is unhealthy. But the question is, as a scientist, the question is not healthy versus unhealthy. It's healthy relative to what? What's the trade-off, right? Now, if you're swapping out milk, and milk may have some of its own issues, perhaps in the terms of like the hormones that it has. But if you compare that to an ultra processed oat milk, which is water, canola oil, which is an oil that never existed in the last 50 years, we chemically extract it from a plant called rapeseed. We've rebranded it canola because that wasn't, as nice sounding.
Sound good for the marketing teams. Like, yeah, we got to change this.
And then we put a bunch of sugar in it and a bunch of gelatin and other things to improve the mouthfeel. And then we're like, oh, this is a healthier and environmentally, superior alternative. But it's just marketing propaganda. God bless the Oatly folks for, convincing people that's the case. But that's kind of the scam. And I feel, as a psychologist, this is the unfortunate thing that you see. A lot of very empathic, well-meaning, in fact, intelligent people fall for this propaganda, and they think that eggs ruin your cholesterol, red meat causes cancer, milk is terrible for you. When the reality is, if you look at your parents and your grandparents who still have high testosterone, they were eating those basic unprocessed foods. And unprocessed foods, even if they're not perfect, maybe not pasture raised, grass fed, et cetera, those are always superior if you can get those. But even on relatively unprocessed foods, whole eggs are always going to be a superior choice than something that has 12 ingredients, came out of a factory with a bunch of chemical sounding names that you've never heard of. So people can have these dietary debates. What's the best diets, low fat versus low carb? Look, as a behavioral psychologist, I always say there's two things. The best diet's the one that you can stick to long term. So you should pick the one that you're willing to do and able to do forever. But number two, I don't think there's any disagreement that ultra processed foods are terrible for us, despite whatever macro of choice is your preferred sort of villain, and that we have to sort of return to a cleaner, essentially, diet, not only for optimal health, but making sure that our hormones are optimal as well.